4,000 Weeks Summary. Oliver Burkeman's argument about time, limits, productivity, and mortality. Time management for mortals, and the power of limits. 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals, is a 2021 nonfiction book by British writer Oliver Burkeman. It is part productivity critique, part philosophical self-help, and part modern argument about mortality, attention, work, and the danger of treating life as a problem to optimize. The original U.S. edition was published by Farrar, Straus and Giroux in August 2021, while later UK and paperback editions were published through Penguin Bodley Head and Picador formats. Burkeman was already known for writing on psychology, productivity, and self-help culture, including his Guardian column, "This Column Will Change Your Life." Penguin describes his work as focused on productivity, mortality, limits, and building a meaningful life in a confusing age. The book became a New York Times and Sunday Times bestseller, and Time included it in its list of 100 must-read books of 2021. Its central premise is brutally simple. If you live to about 80, your life contains roughly 4,000 weeks. Burkeman's point is not that this fact should make life smaller. It is that almost everything useful about time begins when you stop pretending your supply is unlimited. The big idea of the book. The big idea of 4,000 Weeks is that most time management advice makes the central problem worse. It promises that with the right system, tool, habit, app, routine, morning ritual, or planning method, you can finally get everything under control. Burkeman argues that this is the wrong goal. The real human problem is not poor efficiency. It is finitude. You do not have enough time for everything. You never will. You cannot read every book, pursue every ambition, reply to every message, maintain every friendship perfectly, optimize every area of your health, stay informed about every crisis, and also live with calm attention. The modern world sells the fantasy that the right method will remove this conflict. Burkeman says, the conflict is life itself. That makes 4,000 Weeks both comforting and uncomfortable. It removes the guilt of failing to master everything, but it also removes the excuse that everything can remain possible. If time is finite, then choosing one thing means not choosing another. If attention is finite, then every distraction is not just a harmless interruption, it is a small act of life allocation. If control is limited, then the demand for certainty becomes a way of refusing reality. Burkeman's deepest claim is that freedom does not come from escaping limits. It comes from accepting them clearly enough to make real choices. The moment you admit that you cannot do everything, you can stop arranging life around fantasy capacity and start protecting the few things that genuinely matter. The argument in one flow. Burkeman begins with a reversal of ordinary productivity culture. Most books about time begin by assuming that time is a resource to be managed more effectively. 4,000 Weeks begins by asking why we came to experience time that way at all. The book argues that human beings did not always relate to time as a measurable container to be filled, spent, saved, wasted, or maximized. Modern clock time made coordination easier, but it also encouraged people to experience life as a sequence of units to be used efficiently. Once time becomes a resource, the self becomes a manager. The day becomes inventory. The calendar becomes a battlefield. This shift matters because it changes the emotional texture of ordinary life. A person no longer simply washes dishes, writes a report, walks somewhere, rests, talks, or waits. Each moment becomes haunted by every alternative use of that same moment. While answering one email, you feel the pressure of the next 10. While working, you feel guilty for not exercising. While resting, you feel guilty for not improving yourself. While spending time with someone, you feel the pull of everything else you are neglecting. Burkeman's first major move is to attack the dream of getting on top of things. The modern productivity promise says that if you become sufficiently organized, you will eventually reach a state where the important work is handled. Inbox is empty, the errands are complete, the obligations are managed, and your life finally becomes available for the meaningful things you keep postponing. Burkeman says this state never arrives. The reason is not merely that people are disorganized. It is that efficiency often increases demand. When you answer emails faster, people send more emails. When you process tasks more effectively, you become someone who can be trusted with more tasks. When technology makes life more convenient, the saved time fills with new expectations. The reward for becoming faster is rarely spaciousness. More often, it is a larger pipeline. This is one of the book's strongest arguments because it explains a familiar contradiction. People have better tools than ever, faster communication than ever, more automated systems than ever, and more productivity advice than ever, yet many feel more rushed rather than less. Burkeman's answer is that productivity culture treats symptoms as the disease. It asks how to process more, when the deeper question is why so much is being admitted into the system in the first place. From there, 4,000 Weeks moves into the idea of finitude. The title is not a gimmick. The number gives mortality a shape the reader can feel. A lifespan of 80 years sounds long when viewed abstractly, but 4,000 weeks sounds shockingly countable. It turns life from an open horizon into a limited stack. Burkeman does not use this to create panic. He uses it to challenge false comfort. Much of ordinary life is organized around an unspoken assumption that there will be a later period when the important things can be handled properly. Later you will write the book, repair the relationship, start the business, spend real time with family, learn the skill, think deeply, slow down, or become the kind of person you meant to become. The future becomes a storage facility for unlived life. The problem is that this future is imaginary. There may be no later. Even if there is, later will bring its own demands, fears, distractions, duties, illnesses, compromises, and losses. A person who postpones meaning until all conditions are settled is postponing meaning forever. That leads to Burkeman's critique of control. The desire to control time is not only a practical desire, it is also an emotional defense against vulnerability. If you could fully master time, you would not have to feel the terrifying openness of being alive. You would not have to choose under uncertainty. You would not have to admit dependency, chance, weakness, aging, interruption, or death. You could turn life into a project plan. 4,000 Weeks repeatedly dismantles that fantasy. Planning is necessary, but plans do not give you sovereignty over reality. Schedules matter, but they do not make the future obedient. Discipline helps, but it cannot remove accident, illness, grief, delay, other people's choices, or the ordinary unpredictability of events. To be human is to act without total control. Burkeman's point is not anti-planning. It is anti-omnipotence. He argues that much anxiety comes from demanding a guarantee that life cannot provide. People do not merely want to prepare for the future. They want to feel certain that the future will validate the preparation. When certainty fails, they often respond by planning harder, optimizing harder, checking harder, and trying to close every gap. The result is not peace. It is a life spent negotiating with imagined outcomes. The book then turns toward choice. If you accept that time is finite, the question changes from, how can I get everything done, to what am I willing to neglect? This is a harsher question, but a more honest one. Every serious commitment requires neglect. To become good at one thing, you must remain mediocre at others. To build one life, you must abandon alternative lives. To love particular people, you must accept that your care is not infinitely distributable. This is where Burkeman's argument becomes more useful than ordinary minimalism. He is not simply saying, do less. That can become another lifestyle performance. He is saying that not everything important can fit. Even good things must be sacrificed. Even meaningful possibilities must be declined. Even worthwhile causes, projects, invitations, books, ambitions, and relationships may exceed your capacity. The emotional difficulty is that humans prefer to imagine choice without loss. We like options because options preserve possible selves. A person with 10 open ambitions can still imagine being all 10 kinds of person. Choosing one exposes the death of the other 9. Burkeman's argument is that maturity requires accepting this grief. Missing out is not evidence that life has gone wrong. It is the structure that allows any chosen life to exist. This leads to one of the book's most memorable reversals: the joy of missing out. The popular phrase, fear of missing out, assumes that missing out is a problem to reduce. Burkeman reframes it. Since you must miss out on nearly everything, the task is not to avoid missing out. The task is to miss out deliberately. Once you choose your losses, the unchosen world becomes less tyrannical. You can stop treating every alternative as an accusation. The argument then moves into attention. Time is not only measured in weeks or hours. It is experienced through attention. A life is made of what you attend to. This means distraction is not a minor productivity issue. It is existential. Burkeman does not treat distraction as a simple failure of willpower. He argues that people often flee the present because the present confronts them with limitation. Serious work is uncomfortable because it exposes your limits. Relationships are uncomfortable because they involve uncontrollable other people. Stillness is uncomfortable because it removes the noise that protects you from your own mind. Boredom is uncomfortable because it makes you feel the raw texture of time. Digital distraction offers relief from that discomfort. The phone promises a quick exit from finitude. A person writing a difficult paragraph can check messages and briefly become someone with options again. A person sitting with sadness can scroll and avoid the weight of it. A person facing a hard choice can consume more information and pretend they are still preparing rather than choosing. The cost is enormous. Distraction does not merely waste time. It trains the self to avoid the conditions under which meaningful life occurs. Anything worth doing will include boredom, uncertainty, incompetence, repetition, frustration, and exposure. If every uncomfortable moment becomes a cue to flee, then the person becomes unable to stay with the very activities they claim to value. Burkeman's response is patience. Not inspirational patience, but practical patience. The ability to remain with something after the novelty has gone and before mastery has arrived. Modern life encourages impatience because it treats friction as a design flaw. Slow processes feel suspicious. Waiting feels like waste. Difficulty feels like evidence that the method is wrong. 4,000 Weeks argues the opposite. Some goods are only available through duration. You cannot shortcut friendship, craft, trust, thought, grief, recovery, or depth. You can make certain tasks faster, but not every valuable human experience improves when compressed. A culture that removes all inconvenience may also remove the conditions for meaning. The book is especially sharp on convenience. Convenience promises to free people from mundane burdens. Sometimes it does. But Burkeman warns that convenience can also flatten experience. If every activity is judged by how quickly it reaches an outcome, then process becomes an obstacle. Cooking becomes food delivery. Walking becomes transport inefficiency. Conversation becomes information exchange. Leisure becomes content consumption. The texture of life thins out. This connects to another major distinction in the book: activities done for an end versus activities valuable in themselves. Much of modern life is instrumental. People exercise to optimize health, rest to improve productivity, read to extract takeaways, socialize to network, meditate to regulate performance, and take holidays to recharge for work. Even pleasure becomes a tool. Burkeman pushes the reader toward activities that do not need justification through future payoff. A walk can matter as a walk. A conversation can matter without becoming personal development. A hobby can remain gloriously unproductive. Time does not become meaningful only when it produces something measurable later. Some of the best uses of time are not uses in that sense at all. The next step in the argument is social. Burkeman notes that time is not only individual. People often imagine time management as a private struggle between one person and their calendar, but meaningful time is frequently shared time. Friendship, family, religious life, civic life, celebration, mourning, and community depend on coordination. A completely flexible individual schedule can become lonely if it detaches you from common rhythms. This is a subtle but important part of the book. Freedom is often marketed as the ability to do anything whenever you want. But if everyone is individually optimizing their own schedule, shared life becomes harder. A society of maximally flexible individuals may become a society where nobody is available at the same time. Burkeman, therefore, treats time not only as a personal asset, but as a social medium. The book also explores the anxiety of future outcomes. People often try to live in the future mentally because they believe the present will become bearable once the future is secure. Burkeman argues that this creates a permanent deferral. The mind keeps leaning ahead, asking whether the project will succeed, whether the relationship will last, whether the career will work, whether the risk will pay off, whether the plan will protect against regret. The tragedy is that this future checking consumes the only time that actually exists. You cannot live in the future. You can only imagine it from the present. If your present is constantly used to secure a later present, then your life becomes a chain of deferred arrivals. Burkeman's answer is not to abandon ambition. He does not say goals are meaningless. He says goals become destructive when they turn the present into nothing but a means. The healthiest relationship with the future is one where planning supports present commitment rather than replacing it. You prepare, but you do not demand that preparation abolish uncertainty. The book's later argument moves toward insignificance. Burkeman introduces the liberating possibility that your life does not matter on the cosmic scale. At first, this sounds bleak, but he uses it therapeutically. If the universe is not grading your productivity, legacy, status, inbox response speed, or personal brand, then some of the pressure can be released. This is not nihilism. It is proportion. Most personal anxieties depend on exaggerated self-importance. The delayed reply, awkward meeting, failed project, missed trend, imperfect decision, or abandoned ambition feels enormous from inside the ego. Against the scale of history, it shrinks. Cosmic insignificance can therefore become a strange form of mercy. It lets you care deeply without pretending that everything is ultimate. The final movement of 4,000 Weeks is practical, but not in the conventional hack-driven style. Burkeman offers tools for living with finitude, fixed volume productivity, serializing projects, deciding what to fail at, keeping a dune list, using boring technology, acting on generous impulses quickly, paying closer attention to ordinary moments, and practicing doing nothing. These are not meant as tricks for squeezing more output from the same life. Their purpose is philosophical discipline. They force the reader to behave as if limits are real. A fixed volume approach says your capacity is not infinite. Serializing says you cannot pursue every meaningful project simultaneously. Deciding what to fail at says neglect is not an accident, but a necessary allocation. Boring technology says attention is worth protecting from engineered compulsion. The conclusion is not be more productive. It is stop trying to become the impossible person who has no limits. The life Burkeman recommends is not passive, lazy, or anti-ambition. It is more serious than that. He wants the reader to make harder choices, not easier excuses. He wants time to be treated as life, not as a container for life. If his argument is right, then the question, how do I get everything done, is a trap. The better question is, what deserves the irreversible substance of my attention? The most important ideas inside the argument. The first important idea is that finitude is not a problem to solve. It is the condition that makes choice meaningful. A life with infinite time would have no urgency, no sacrifice, and no shape. The fact that time runs out is what forces values to become visible. The second idea is that efficiency can become a trap. People often assume that faster systems will produce more freedom. Burkeman shows why that often fails. More capacity attracts more demand. A faster worker receives more work. A faster communicator enters more communication. A faster life can become more crowded. The third idea is that attention is life in its most immediate form. You do not experience your life as an abstract timeline. You experience it through whatever has your attention now. This makes attention management more than productivity. It becomes moral and existential. The fourth idea is that meaningful choice requires chosen neglect. This is the book's hardest practical lesson. You cannot make a serious commitment without disappointing some alternative possibility. A person who refuses to neglect anything becomes unavailable for the few things they claim to love most. The fifth idea is that control has limits. Planning matters, but the future cannot be made fully safe. Much suffering comes from trying to extract certainty from a reality that will not provide it. The sixth idea is that ordinary life is not a waiting room. People often imagine that real life will begin after the current pressure lifts. Burkeman argues that the pressure is part of the only life available. Meaning has to be built inside imperfect conditions, not postponed until they disappear. The strongest chapter, or section. The strongest section of 4,000 Weeks is the argument around the efficiency trap. It is powerful because it explains why so many intelligent, disciplined people still feel behind. The problem is not simply that they have failed to optimize. The problem is that optimization can increase the volume of what they are expected to handle. This section also gives the book its strongest practical edge. If the efficiency trap is real, then the answer is not another app, another workflow, another time-blocking method, or another productivity guru. The answer is boundary, refusal, and deliberate undercapacity. You need a system that protects what matters, not a system that proves you can absorb endless demand. The idea is especially relevant to knowledge work. Email, Slack, Teams, dashboards, meetings, documents, notifications, and task tools often promise control while multiplying the surface area of obligation. The worker thinks they are building a command center. In reality, they may be building more doors through which other people can enter their attention. Burkeman's best insight is that getting things done can become a way of avoiding the question of which things should not be done at all. The weakest chapter, or section. The weakest part of the book is not a single chapter so much as a recurring limitation. Burkeman's advice is psychologically strong but structurally incomplete. He is excellent on the inner fantasy of control. He is less forceful on the external systems that punish people for refusing impossible demands. For a freelancer, senior professional, parent, carer, low-wage worker, student, founder, or employee in a demanding organization, choose what to neglect can be true and still brutally difficult. Some people are not merely overcommitted because they are deluded. They are overcommitted because their job, family system, debt, health, immigration status, housing situation, or social obligations give them little room to refuse. Burkeman knows this, and the book is not naive, but its practical center of gravity remains individual. It tells the reader to change their relationship with time, and that is valuable. Yet some time pressure is political, economic, technological, and managerial. A worker cannot always meditate their way out of understaffing. A parent cannot always philosophy their way out of childcare scarcity. A person in poverty cannot always convert finitude into elegant priority setting. The book's weakness is therefore also its boundary. It is a strong book about consciousness, attention, mortality, and personal choice. It is not a full theory of labor, class, technology, or institutional exploitation. Readers should use it as a tool for clearer living, not as a way to blame individuals for pressures they did not create. What the book proves: 4,000 weeks proves that much productivity advice rests on a false emotional promise. It shows that the dream of getting everything done is not just unrealistic, but corrosive. The more seriously a person believes in that dream, the more likely they are to experience ordinary limitation as personal failure. The book also proves that time management cannot be separated from mortality. A calendar is not just a schedule. It is a moral document. It reveals what receives your life and what does not. Every accepted meeting, opened app, avoided conversation, delayed ambition, and repeated habit is part of the answer to the question of how your finite life is being spent. It also proves that accepting limitation can be liberating, not because limits are pleasant, but because denial is exhausting. When you stop pretending you can fit everything in, you can finally make choices based on reality. What the book does not prove. The book does not prove that productivity systems are useless. Some systems genuinely help people reduce chaos, remember commitments, manage complex work, and protect attention. Burkeman's argument is not that organization is bad. It is that organization becomes dangerous when it serves the fantasy of total control. It does not prove that ambition is foolish. The book is sometimes misread as an argument for withdrawal or lowered standards. That is too simple. Burkeman is asking for more honest ambition, fewer projects, deeper commitment, less fantasy capacity, more willingness to pay the price of focus. It does not prove that all anxiety can be dissolved by accepting mortality. Some anxiety has medical, social, financial, traumatic, or practical causes. Finitude is a major human truth, but it is not a universal cure. It also does not prove that modern people are uniquely broken. The Guardian's Joe Moran noted a fair objection in his review. Human beings may always have struggled with urgency, self-sabotage, and the fear of wasting life, even if the modern era intensifies it. What most summaries miss. Most summaries reduce 4,000 weeks to a few neat lessons. Life is short. Accept limits. Focus on what matters. Stop being so busy. Those points are accurate, but they miss the book's sharper structure. The book is not merely saying that you should prioritize better. It is saying that the desire to avoid painful prioritization is the engine of much modern misery. People do not only need better lists, they need a better relationship with loss. Most summaries also miss how much of the book is about avoidance. Distraction is not treated as a random bad habit. It is treated as a flight from the discomfort of being finite. Busyness is not merely a schedule problem. It can be a shield against the terrifying freedom of choosing one life and letting others die. Another missed point is that Burkeman does not worship slowness for aesthetic reasons. He values slowness because some human goods cannot be accelerated without being changed. Patience is not decorative. It is the cost of depth. Finally, shallow summaries often miss the social dimension. Time is not just personal property. Shared time is part of what makes families, friendships, communities, rituals, and public life possible. A person can optimize their individual calendar and still become lonely. What most people misunderstand. The easiest misunderstanding is to treat 4,000 weeks as an anti-productivity book. It is not. Burkeman does not argue for laziness, drift, or indifference. He argues for finite productivity, the kind that begins with the knowledge that capacity is limited. Another misunderstanding is to think the book says nothing matters. Burkeman's cosmic insignificance argument can sound like nihilism when stripped of context. His real point is that because most things matter less than your ego claims, you are freer to invest in the few things that matter to you now. A third misunderstanding is to turn the book into another optimization strategy. Some readers will try to use finitude to become calmer, sharper, more focused, and more effective at achieving the same overloaded agenda. That misses the warning. If finitude becomes just another productivity technique, The old fantasy has survived under a new name. The book is not asking how to become a better machine. It is asking what should remain when you stop trying to be one. The dangerous misreading. The dangerous misreading is, I have limited time, so I should ignore obligations and only do what feels meaningful. That is not Burkeman's argument. Finitude does not abolish duty. It clarifies duty. A finite life still includes boring work, care, admin, compromise, service, patience, maintenance, and responsibility. The point is not to chase only peak experiences. The point is to stop letting low-value noise consume the life needed for serious commitments. Another dangerous misreading is using mortality as pressure. Some people read 4,000 weeks and become more frantic. They try to extract maximum significance from every hour. That turns the book into the very disease it diagnoses. Burkeman's argument is not panic, because life is short. It is relax your impossible standards, because life is short. The healthiest reading is disciplined acceptance. You will miss out. You will fail at some things. You will disappoint some expectations. You will not become every possible version of yourself. That is not a malfunction. That is the price of having a life with shape. The tailored interpretation. 4,000 Weeks is really a book about fantasy capacity. Fantasy capacity is the imaginary version of yourself who has enough energy, discipline, focus, time, emotional steadiness, and future opportunity to honor every commitment you casually accept today. Most people plan with that imaginary self in mind. They say yes, as if tomorrow's version of them will be calmer, stronger, clearer, and less interrupted. Burkeman's book destroys that imaginary person. It asks you to plan as the finite person you actually are, not the ideal version, not the future redeemed version, not the version who finally has perfect habits and no conflicting desires. The real one, distractible, mortal, limited, inconsistent, needy, capable of depth, but only when protected from overload. That makes the book more radical than it first appears. It is not a gentle reminder to enjoy life. It is an attack on self-deception. Every overloaded calendar depends on a lie about the person who will have to live it. Every endless to-do list depends on a fantasy body and mind. Every postponed dream depends on a future that has not consented to your plan. The tailored reading is this. Your calendar should be built for the person who will actually wake up tomorrow, not the imaginary performer your ambition keeps inventing. Why this book still matters. 4,000 Weeks still matters because the pressure it describes has intensified rather than faded. Work communication is faster. AI tools make output easier, which can also raise expectations. Social platforms multiply comparison. News cycles never end. Personal brands require maintenance. Hobbies become side hustles. Rest becomes recovery optimization. Even reading can become content extraction. The result is a culture where people are constantly urged to become more efficient, while rarely being invited to ask what the efficiency is for. Macmillan's description of the book captures this tension directly. Burkeman sets aside superficial efficiency solutions in favor of reckoning with the finitude of human life. The book remains useful because it refuses the dominant promise of modern self-improvement. It does not say you can become unlimited. It says the attempt to become unlimited is part of why you feel trapped. That is why the book works for professionals, creators, parents, students, leaders, and anyone with too many tabs open in both browser and brain. Its argument applies wherever human beings confuse availability with value. If you only remember 3 ideas. First, you will not get everything done. This is not failure. It is the baseline condition of human life. The sooner you accept it, the sooner you can stop using your energy to defend an impossible standard. Second, every choice is also a sacrifice. A meaningful life is not built by keeping all options open. It is built by choosing which losses are worth bearing. Third, attention is the real currency. Your life is not what you theoretically value. It is what repeatedly receives your attention under pressure. The sentence that explains the book. A meaningful life begins when you stop trying to master time and start admitting that every hour is a choice you cannot get back. The real life test. The real life test of 4,000 Weeks is not whether you feel inspired after reading it. It is whether your behavior changes when demand exceeds capacity. When your inbox fills, do you automatically try to answer everything faster, or do you ask which messages deserve no response? When you have 5 possible projects, do you pretend all 5 can move seriously, or do you choose one and accept the grief of delay? When a relationship matters, do you give it actual attention, or do you keep it alive through vague future promises? At work, the test is whether you can distinguish importance from volume. High-volume demand often disguises itself as urgency. Burkeman's argument asks you to protect deep work, strategic thinking, and human judgment from the constant administrative proof that you are busy. In relationships, the test is whether you stop treating people as items to maintain later. A finite life makes postponement morally expensive. The message you keep meaning to send, the apology you keep delaying, the visit you keep pushing back, and the conversation you keep avoiding are not waiting outside time. They are being paid for with weeks. In ambition, the test is whether you can stop using possibility as a drug. It feels good to imagine all the books you might write, businesses you might start, countries you might move to, bodies you might build, and lives you might lead. But possibility can become anesthetic. Choice is what turns fantasy into life. In health, the test is whether you stop demanding perfect conditions before acting. You do not need the perfect routine, perfect equipment, perfect mental state, or perfect future week. You need a finite action, repeated inside imperfect reality. In digital life, the test is whether you treat distraction as life leakage. Every scroll is not catastrophic, but repeated escape becomes identity. What you reach for in discomfort trains what you become capable of staying with. 5 questions to test whether you understood the book. What am I still trying to get on top of that may never be fully clear, complete, or controlled? Which important thing am I avoiding by staying busy with smaller, easier obligations? What am I willing to fail at, neglect, or disappoint so that something more important can receive real attention? Where am I using planning to support action? And where am I using planning to avoid uncertainty? If my life is measured by what gets my attention, what does my current behavior say I value? The final lesson. 4,000 Weeks lands because it removes the most seductive excuse in modern life, that your real life can begin once everything is under control. It will not be under control. The inbox will refill. The plan will break. The body will age. Other people will interrupt. The future will remain uncertain. You will choose wrongly sometimes. You will waste time. You will miss out on almost everything. That is not the tragedy. The tragedy is spending a finite life trying to become infinite. Burkeman's final lesson is sharper than comfort and kinder than panic. Stop waiting for mastery over time. Choose the work, people, duties, pleasures, and risks that can survive the knowledge that life is short. Then give them the only thing you ever truly had, this stretch of attention, in this unrecoverable week.